This morning we're going to look about how some bad choices can lead to really bad choices. And how a series of good choices can lead to some really good choices. We're starting this sermon series in which we've been discovering that Elijah, the prophet that we find in 1st and 2nd Kings, is an individual that we're told in the Bible is just like us. And we might question, how is he just like us? I mean, 2 weeks ago, last time we were talking about him, he prayed over somebody and he rose from the dead. And then today, we're going to have the first of several times in Elijah's life where he calls down fire and it falls from the heavens. That doesn't sound like somebody just like us, does it? But 2 weeks ago I made the argument that he was just like us and that he had to learn through a series of difficult circumstances to trust in the provisions of God. To trust in the provisions of God. And as he learned to trust in the provisions of God, it leads to choices that are going to change his life. And because his life has changed, others are going to trust in him as well. And the remarkable thing is that as he learns to trust in God more, God teaches him, and because God teaches him, he learns to trust in God more. It becomes a wonderful circle. A wonderful circle. But I've got some bad news. There are bad choices as well that each one of us can make, and as we make bad choices, we learn to actually block the power of God out of our lives. And as we block God, that leads to more bad choices and leads to a very bad circle. But you know what? We'll focus mostly on the good guy. Because as we learn to choose to follow him properly, God can do great, great things. The people of Israel, the big issue right now, is they're worshiping this guy called Baal. Might actually pronounce it Baal. Doesn't really matter a whole lot. We're going to call him Baal because it's quicker to say. His name literally in the ancient languages means the master. And the way in which he was worshipped and the way in which he was perceived by people meant many different things to different people. And the people of Israel are worshiping at this point in time a whole lot of different gods, Baal being one of the predominant ones, but the true God was one of the ones that they worshipped. And Elijah comes along and says, hang on. You shouldn't be worshiping all of these gods. Just worship one God. And to get your attention, there will be no rain for the next 3.5 years. Rain out. Now, there's a few people in this room that might really get your attention, right? I've seen a few of our farmers aren't present because, hey, it's harvest time, but I mean, 3.5 years, no rain, that's certainly going to get attention around here, isn't it? Ahab is the king. His wife is Jezebel, the queen. And with this drought, not only are they losing financially, their kingdom is threatened, they are losing prestige, and they're not making good choices because of it. They're not turning towards God. In fact, because of it, there is pressure on people everywhere to keep worshiping the wrong gods. And you know what? At times, it takes great courage to go against what everybody in our culture is doing. And not many are choosing to go against the culture of their day. There are so many difficult choices. There are others there. There are others who are going along, and Ahab and Jezebel are influencing the culture, and people are worshiping Baal and worshiping all these other gods, and they're saying, well, I'll be a quiet follower. I do want to follow God, but I'm a little scared to make a big deal of it, so I'll just stand quietly at the back of the Baal worship, but I'll be right in the worship of God. Sometimes the best of intentions do not take us to where we need to go, though. It's hard when there's a lot of pressure against us to make good choices. As I was thinking about this sermon and thinking about, because we had Ann Stevens with us last week and we're talking about Congo, I was thinking about the first trip that we made to Congo, and so we were here at this event. Just before we were ready to go home, we were in the compound where Ann lives, and we had spent the first part of our time there with Pastor Pepin and the Consundi Church there, and we were told we had to come up to Ann's because Pastor Pepin and his wife Natasha had come over to Natalie, wrong one. Natasha's Pastor South Florian's. Just came along. Anyways, they were there to come visit, and so we went up and we were having this visit, just kind of a casual talk, and I forget exactly how it went, but we somehow got talking about some of the sports in Canada or something like that, or some things we do. It might have been about hockey or something like that. And Pepin said, "Oh yeah, I've watched figure skating quite often live." We kind of all, you mean on TV, right? There isn't much ice in Congo. And he said, no, I've seen it. And even Ann, who was translating that time, was a little surprised. It was kind of, really? You've seen figures? When did you see figure skating? Oh, when I lived in Moscow. So start quizzing there. And very quickly became quite apparent. Through the 1970s and 80s, Congo was very much under the oppression of a communist dictatorship. Why was Pepin in Moscow? It was to have God educated out of him. To have it educated out of him. To say that, you know what, we don't want you to believe, because it was threatening to them to have somebody believe in God. To have somebody even have that belief as part of their life was threatening to the very government system that they had. And so they ship him off to Moscow to try to teach him not to believe in God. And obviously, if he's pastoring a church today, it didn't work very well. At times, when we make the decision to follow Jesus, it can be very difficult. It can be very difficult. It can lead to tough choices. And sometimes it can seem just easier to compromise with the world around us. I read that passage out of 2 Corinthians chapter 6, for what do righteousness and wickedness have in common? What fellowship can light have with darkness? And then it brings up Christ and Baal. It says, what do they have in agreement? Because this is a remarkable thing, the temple of the living God. We can brush over that real quick. What that means is God himself resides within our very lives. I will live with them and walk with them, and I will be their God and they will be my people, it said. So what do we have to do with things that are not of God? Baal was a lot of fun to worship, though. Baal was kind of out of control. He was fun. He was the popular one. The authorities certainly approved of him and encouraged people to worship him. And even if you were one of these ones that came along and said, no, there's just one God, just worship him. The answer would be something along, well, what does it hurt to worship this God as well? When we worship Baal, even if you don't believe he exists, we're not hurting anyone, are we? Does this sound like the modern day? It should. The other gods, other God, our God, you worship them, and you worship them because they gave you something. You could could worship God and you could chase all sorts of pleasures of the body. And excuse it because, hey, you were worshiping some God over there. Or chase money and materialism and get rich. Well, you're just doing it to worship this God over there, so it's okay. It's a good thing to do. And at key moments of life, they would come back to the one true God, the God of Israel. At key moments, they would come at Passover or on the Sabbath, and they would do their religious thing. But Elijah is the example that to follow the true God sometimes means hard choices. And faith changes the choices we make in our lives. We may not serve foreign idols, but we are just like Elijah, and that we have to make tough choices to go against the culture that is around us. Elijah, in his right choices, chooses to follow the true God and challenges those around him. So after 3.5 years of drought, he goes and finds a man by the name of Obadiah. Obadiah was one of these guys who really wanted to follow God, but he was a little secretive in it. Didn't quite let out that that was the only God he believed in. And went to Obadiah and said, I want you to go tell the king I'm here. And Obadiah says, not a chance. The king finds out, if he catches you, for sure you're dead. And odds are he's going to kill me because he thinks, because I'm associated with you in some way. And odds are I'm going to go tell him that you're here and you're just going to disappear. Elijah says, no, it'll be okay. I'll be here. You go get the king. So he does. And the king comes up to Elijah and says, are you here, troubler? Now, troubler does not sound like much of an insult in modern English. But trust me, he is trying to say, you're the source of all of our troubles. He is trying to insult him. He is trying to say, you are wicked and evil for following God. And you know what? Sometimes life can be very unfair. If we truly follow God, sometimes we are going to be labeled as people who bring trouble. But Elijah issues a challenge. I want you to find all these prophets of Baal. We're going to go over here. There's a mountain behind me, Mount Carmel. Not really behind me. Don't look behind me. There's a mountain behind me, Mount Carmel. We're going to go climb that mountain. You bring all your prophets of Baal. I'll come up there. And we're going to do something quite remarkable. It's a challenge. Verse 21. Elijah went before the people and said, how long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to build 2 altars. You're going to pray, you followers of Baal. I want fire to fall down from heaven to prove that this Baal is true. And when we're done, and when you're done praying, I'm going to pray to the Lord. And if he is truly God, fire is going to fall from heaven. And it's going to be obvious. You like God, but you're not willing to commit to God. You call to your God, I'll call to mine. We're going to have a showdown. And so they do that. They build an altar. They have a big party. Baal's the fun god. They have a great party. They dance. They sing. They jump around. They get worked up into a great frenzy. Oh, it's exciting. And they start getting weird things. They start cutting themselves and all sorts of things. But part of the frenzy they're working themselves up into. Oh, they're having a good old time. But Elijah's walking down and saying, yeah, but the bottom line is, I don't see no fire from heaven. Yeah, you're having a fun time, but maybe you should call a little louder. Maybe you should get whipped into a bigger... Maybe Baal's on vacation. Maybe he's taking the day off. He even starts taunting him so much. Well, maybe Baal's in the washroom. Call him out of there. I just kind of crude even. They're working hard. They go through the wars. They go to lunchtime, they go through the afternoon. They're having a grand old time. We get to verse 29. Midday passed, and they continued their frantic prophesying until the time for the evening sacrifice. But there was no response. No one answered. No one paid attention. This version of Baal, there were different versions of Baal. But this particular version of Baal, who they saw and they called his master, was one in which satisfied their desires to go into wild frenzies and to have this wild celebration. But doesn't answer. There are a lot of gods we can chase that in the end we ask for help. They don't answer. They don't answer. I know a lot of people who worship things like money, and I'll tell you, try praying to it. Doesn't happen. They have lots of fun, but it leads nowhere. Then it's Elijah's turn. He takes 12 stones, precisely 12, one for each tribe of Israel, builds a small altar, puts a sacrifice on it. Then he gets really daring. They start dumping water on it. It's a drought. It hasn't rained for 3.5 years. They're up top of a mountain that is dry at the best times. Where he got the water from? They would have to work hard to get it up there. They don't just dump a little bit. They keep going. They dump. They dump. Barrel after barrel till they get to some of them. And in this time of drought, far from water, they douse that altar. The Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Lord. Answer me, so that these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again. This is not just about God trying to prove himself, but trying to turn their hearts back from bad choices that have led to this situation where their hearts are not fully committed to God, where they are chasing after all of these other things. And it may not be the easiest for them to make the right choices, but that's what God calls us to do. In the Gospel of John, chapter 11, it says this: he came to that which was his own. Now this is obviously talking about Jesus, not talking about Elijah. Jesus came to his own. People were also making bad choices, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Even Jesus got rejected by an awful lot. But to those who make the basic right choice, good things can happen. Like a lot of people, I was really stunned this week by the events that occurred in Oregon. When a gunman comes in, and according to some of the reports, he stands before people and asks them if they believe in Jesus, if they follow Christ. If they ask, he asks them, right here in North America, so what's your allegiance? And shoots those who say that they will follow Jesus Christ. You know, this world, there's nothing new. There is nothing new. It is not new that people make wrong choices that go against the things of Jesus. At some points in history, though, at least those who made right choices might have been admired by some in society. Not so much now. Because sometimes when you become a follower of Jesus, somebody might feel guilty. And if you do something that's ethically correct, if you do something that's good, it might make somebody else feel bad, and we can't have that. And the world around us may reject us because of the fact that we might induce guilt, that we might make others feel bad. And I'm going to tell you, it may become harder and harder in our society to make the right choice to follow Jesus. And more the world might just want us to be secret about our allegiances. Kind of like that Obadiah at the beginning who, yeah, he wants to follow God, but maybe not tell the king about it. Certainly that is the trend in our society. But look at the verse behind me. John chapter 1. Yeah, a lot are going to reject Jesus. But for those who make the right, here's the promise. You make the right choice, become a child of God. That's a promise for those who follow Jesus Christ. And that promise may not be as immediately gratified as chasing after the gods of this world, but boy, it means everything. It means the promise is worth it. So the fire falls. The altar's consumed. The water's all lapped up. He's won. He's won. When all the people saw this, they fell prostrate and cried, "The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God." That's something. Some start to make the right choices. Now, just because they start calling this doesn't mean that everybody starts making right choices. We're going to see that in just a moment. They end up wiping out those who've been dancing all day before Baal. It's quite a gruesome story, actually. And Elijah turns to Ahab and says, okay, it can rain now. In fact, they go through a whole story that we're going to kind of skip over real quick, but basically they start looking for clouds. Eventually a cloud comes and he says to Ahab, you better start moving because otherwise you're going to get rained on. And the rain comes. The rain finally starts to fall. Do you know what? We can sit in church. And this is an easy place to follow God. It is. And it's harder out there. It's harder out there. But this is a great place to start because here we can build a foundation. God tells us how to choose Him. And the basic choice that we start with is we need to acknowledge that I make mistakes, that I do something that the Bible calls sin, that I am a sinner, that I ask for forgiveness, and I invite Him to be my Savior. And the other part of it, I invite Him to be my Lord. That means that I say that I need Him, that I will follow Him. In other words, that I put my faith in Him. That I give my sins over to Jesus and He takes them and they're done away with. And that's a basic choice. But it doesn't stop there. It's not over. And I'm called on to make choices day after day to do what is right. Tough choices in my own life. To choose our Lord as my God, not the gods that this world worships. Who are these gods? Who are the gods that the ancients and people in our own modern day chase after? I mean, certainly, I mentioned pleasure already. Materialism. Certainly in their day and our day, lust is a huge one. Now, there's a lot of others, though. I don't think a week goes by where I don't have somebody in my office who I think, in the end, worships self-pity. That becomes their identity that they cling and hold on to. Oh, everybody's against me. Everybody's opposed to me. That almost becomes something they worship. It's a very difficult one. How about this one? Busyness and stress. All in our day and age. And I have been very guilty of this. I do not say this to condemn thinking about myself, because I've fallen into this trap that sit around and talk with people and begin conversations, and it almost becomes everybody comparing who's the busiest, who's the most stressed out. Is that kind of becomes our identity, and it becomes what we worship? Does that become a god? I mean, there's nothing wrong with being busy. And God sometimes does call us to be busy. We're not called to sit in our hands. But sometimes we turn that into our self-identity, how busy we are. Satan is going to work individually in each of our lives to call up gods that tempt us. I promise that it will happen. We need to make daily choices to stay close to God. Because it's never going to be easy. I'm going to tell you the most remarkable thing of this entire story of Elijah calling down fire from the heavens. Do you know what it is? Ahab, Jezebel, a lot of the people who really follow Baal, guess what? Not only are they unimpressed by this display, they become angry at God and Elijah. All it does is anger them. We aren't going to necessarily convince the entire world to follow God and to do what is right. But the smaller choices we make to be people of God and to give our allegiance to Jesus, the small choices we make prepare us for the big choices that come later. When they stood on that mountain, and some chose to follow God, and some chose to follow Baal, it wasn't just in a vacuum. Elijah's courage came out of the things we found in chapter 17 where God molded him. And the things where Ahab and Jezebel, in the end, do not, even after all they've seen God do, when they do not follow him, it doesn't come out of the fact that just they weren't unimpressed. It becomes they made bad choices to block God all along. And we day to day make decisions. Am I going to take time to pray? Read Bible? To help people generously, to give generously, to abstain from certain temptations. All of those things either move us towards God or they teach us to block God. And one day, we're called on to make big decisions. When the big battle comes, the little decisions we've made along the way have prepared us to make a big, right choice. We need to continually seek the Holy Spirit. And that be one of our prayers every day. I think more and more, I'm becoming more and more convinced one of the prayers we need to pray every day is we find our satisfaction in Jesus. That we are satisfied fully in Him and not the things of this world. In that way, the things of this world will fall away, and the choice to follow Jesus will always, always be evident.